Guys, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe because this is a gamer's guide to productivity. So, welcome back, everyone, to an exciting episode. Today, of course, it's your host, Nico Penguin, and we have a special treat for you, okay? Today, we're being joined by
JV Hilliard.
JV Hilliard. And I had to pause there because I accidentally opened up a tab and I was hearing
Oh, I
myself
thought you
speak
were waiting for me to introduce myself.
but yes, J.V. Hilliard is here, the masterful author behind the War Minister saga. His epic fantasy and dark fantasy works have captivated readers across the world. And today he's going to be sharing his journey, insights, and the incredible world that he's built within his books. Okay. So get ready to dive into a realm of magic, adventure, and creativity. And as mentioned, once again, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe because we want to make sure that JV is very well appreciated. So thank you so much for joining us today, JV.
It is my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Nico. I appreciate the time.
Yes, and I once again I do apologize about that little hiccup there in the introduction. I was trying to make sure that the audience was also watching us as well, very well. But for those that may not know, let them know what is the passion and the joy that you get from writing.
Yeah, so I have always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't write until about 4 years ago. I was one of many in a group of COVID writers who used that downtime of a year and a half to pen that novel. And it's always been in my head. And my novel turned out to be four novels and a video game and a graphic novel series and a bunch of other things that came from it. And prior to that,
Wow.
I was a defense lobbyist, man. I worked in DC on defense and technology stuff. But I've always wanted to be a writer, and the fantasy adventure arc has been one I've been following since I was young and read The Hobbit in fourth grade. So like for me, I've
You
always had
didn't
these
do
great
anything
ideas.
like that?
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, man, I
That's the fourth
literally
grade?
fourth grade. Yeah,
That's the ninth grade book.
I know I was a little advanced, but I had, for me,
Yeah.
I loved it, and I fell in love with the genre, and
Fact.
anything that's fantasy or sci-fi, I'm a voracious reader, and even some of the embarrassing stuff, like the Harry Potter, big fan of that, and Twilight and things like that that are just have
Fact.
vampires in it. I just love it, man. I can't get enough of it. And so for me, I've always known I wanted to be a writer, but just never really had the time to do it. And then COVID happened, and it allowed me the time to do it. I'm also a big D&D nerd, so for
Mhm,
me,
mhm.
Dungeons and Dragons opened the door for that. And I'll tell you what, as a dungeon master, it's easy to tell it. You learn how to tell a story, and you're doing it
Right.
verbally. Now it's just a matter of taking that and applying it to something in writing, and instead of me explaining it to you in a game setting, tabletop role playing game setting, I'm now explaining it to you in a book, and it's a little bit more linear, and you don't have as many, character issues going one side or another. So, I've used those experiences to really kind of, help inform my writing.
Well, that's actually pretty interesting. So, would you say that your prior background and experiences as a dungeon master enable you to now essentially play your own game, aka the next book you're working on, and essentially like you can craft the beginning, middle, and end, and then craft in those conflicts, craft in, weave in the tale, and then essentially your audience is just visibly there, or they're watching or reading or listening to you weaving this story that you have this immaculate amount of experience crafting.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. So as a dungeon master and a player of the games, you learn to become a good storyteller, right? It's all verbal at that time, and you learn to connect with your players, right? And either that, or you're a player and you're trying to connect with your dungeon master. In
Hmm.
either way, you're using your creativity to lock in and also predict where the story arc is going. In this case, the campaign, and things like that. And it allows you to kind of see a little bit farther down the road than most people, I think. And it's a good practice, right? It puts you in situations and role playing that you might find in real life sometimes. You might not be carrying a sword or chasing a dragon, but you might be going after the next contract or the
Right.
next thing, and so you're not as there are aspects of what comes from gaming that are usable in life, right? And I like those kind of things too. But ultimately for me, it really trained me to be an author, and I write every day anyway. Like whether it's a speech or a policy paper or a grant or a contract, there's always some sort of technical writing I was doing. This
Right.
was just spinning it and applying that to fiction, which means I have to write dialogue and prose and I have to pace things well. And so it's a different style of writing, but I never mind sitting in front of a keyboard and hammering out, a couple of chapters. And it's just a lot of fun.
And then because you have been a dungeon master, for those that may not be aware, um, would you roughly estimate how long you've done this? Like, from what age did you start being a dungeon master, and roughly estimate how many games you've played and how many hours you've served?
Yeah. So I've been playing since I was 10. My uncle got
Yeesh.
me got me my first D&D set for Christmas when I was 10 years old, and he was my
Wow.
first dungeon master. So I played with him growing up with the game, fell in love with the genre. I mentioned The Hobbit a little earlier and Lord of the Rings. And what I took the first time I dungeon master was probably when I was 13. So I've been playing
Mhm.
for about 20 years. And
Wow.
during that time frame, I've played with family, I've played with friends, I've played online. I can't give it's countless hours really to answer your question. And usually because these games are a little different. This isn't Monopoly where you play it for an hour and a half and you put the board away and you put the box away. These things are campaigns, right? So they're lifelong stories. Some of these campaigns, you play your characters, you're playing for a year or two, sometimes even longer.
Wow.
And so you might not play all that much. Like when I was younger, we would play 3 or 4 times a week. Now everybody's grown and have families and other responsibilities. So,
Right. Right.
my nerd group gets together on Sundays 6 to 10, and we Skype in because we're all over the country now.
Right.
So
Right.
even when we're traveling for work, there's no one's doing anything 6 to 10 at night on Sunday. So we're playing D&D, and a lot of our friends get together for poker night. We get together for Dungeons and Dragons night. It's the geek way, right? But for me,
This is
I've been
the
doing
way.
it now for a real long time, and it really did help me develop the skills necessary to become a writer.
Wow, that's actually pretty interesting. And you had an immense amount of options concerning backgrounds for character, for story, for world building. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, how hard is it to choose?
Well, it actually is easier than you think, and what I mean
Mm,
by that is if you play a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, in most cases, you can tell what the players liked and didn't like about it. And what I was able to do is cherry pick. I had 20 years of gameplay
right,
and I had memorialized characters and memorialized villains and memorialized situations where when you were describing something to your group, you could see everybody was locked in,
right,
or afterward you were talking about it for years to come.
right.
There are still villains that we talk about like they were real life villains that we conquered. And things, and we'll make inside jokes around our significant others, and they'll look at us like, "What are you guys talking about?" And but it's part of this stuff, and so it becomes a part of you. And for me, I was able to take some of that stuff and the best of the best and create the Realm of Warminster out of it, a 4 book series
Mm,
that was based on it. Now, it's not exactly gameplay, right? Because
right,
as an author, there is no gameplay. You're just telling me what the story is. So I can take all of those side turns that the party took or side turns that a certain character took and eliminate them to make the story however I want to make it. And so that's what made it easy. Like I was able to put together a very complex story that I took the best of the characters and the best of the campaigns and wove them together, to use your term from a little earlier, to put them into a really tight knit story over a 4 book saga.
well, that's actually pretty intriguing. And then, because you had the ability to cherry pick and whatnot, what ways did you see some of the characters that you chose reflect certain parts of either yourself or people that you know?
Oh, geez, that's the ultimate cheat code, right? So, like, some of the characters in the book were characters I played, whether I was playing as a player character or I saw them being played in front of me, or they were my non-player characters as a dungeon master, right? So I saw what I liked in gameplay and I just changed it to make it a little more dramatic in the books.
Mm,
And that way they were already kind of laid out for me. But you're right. I think authors in general are very observant people. And so there are ticks that we give our characters. There are flaws that we give our characters. There are, elite things that they can do because you see people do it and you're like, wow, that would really be exciting in this book. And so even though you might be taking them from your own contemporary existence, and seeing somebody that you recognize, and there's maybe that one little thing that's attractive about that person that most people might not notice, or one thing about that person that bothers you, and if you put a little gasoline and light it on fire in a book, it becomes a real cool character trait for them, right? So
right.
that, I think, is something that's helped too. And I think that I've over the years, I'm goofy. I take notes, whether I dictate it on my phone or I have a little book that I have in my car. So if I'm thinking of something, I put it down. And I often find myself inspired by like music, that I can see battle scenes and or character things coming together when certain songs play, or I even have a playlist that I put on my website for folks that have inspired me, and maybe they'll inspire you too. But like I think too that the experiences of the characters kind of dictate what I've done with them in the book, and then I hide them behind either their original character names or I give them better character names. Let's face it, not all
Mm,
players are gifted enough, and they pick some cheesy names for characters or they do something goofy. As a player, I eliminate all that stuff to make it a little bit more serious when it comes to the books because they're tended to be adult novels, right? So
right.
sure, if you're an advanced young adult, you can read my stuff and be okay with it, but ultimately, these are adult novels and you just can't have weird names or weird things going. You can have memorable stuff, but it has
Right.
to be something that's cool that people want to take away from it.
And then how, as a writer, how do you approach world building to make it feel like you're there, immersive, and believable?
Well, some of that comes, well, in two forms. One is you have to base an entirely fantasy or sci-fi world in some form of realism, right? And I find a lot of that in my previous day job, which was government affairs. When I did that, you experience how nations negotiate with one another, how the federal government works with the state governments, how elected officials interact with one another, whether it's people of their own party, people of their own state, people on the right committees. You see how the country advances its technology to defend its borders or to provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare, right? You
Hmm.
see all of these things as part of
Right.
that, and it allows me to build a very credible world, but in a fantasy setting. And I spun it up. So by way of example, Castleshire, which is like the capital of capitals, it's
Hmm.
kind of like my United Nations, right? But if you travel around the world, you'll see other parts of my realm, the realm of Warminster, that have various very specific things to what and they might be a Viking realm, or they might be a desert people, or they may be something like that, and they all have their own interests, but they all come together in Castleshire to knock out the greater good for the greater realm as part of that. And or I've even instituted a little bit of sci-fi into my realms because I always thought that it was weird that in fantasy, the majority of fantasy stories have very little technological advancement, no matter how long they've been around. It always seems like they're embedded into a medieval society. And so,
It's
you know,
the unspoken rule.
yeah, right. So like Jon Snow is the 999th Watcher on the Wall, and he's still using a sword, right? Thousands of years, right? Or like
You
Tolkien,
said
they
it.
have. Yeah, it's crazy, right? So for me, I have a city called Abacus, which is a city of scholars that advance things. And I'm not talking about blowing people out of the water where they have ray guns and stuff like that, but I'm talking about advancements that you might see going from a medieval age into a Renaissance age, which
Mm,
gives the good guys and or the bad guys an advantage here and there. And I saw that by doing work at the Pentagon. There are things that we've invested in as a society that we use to protect ourselves, in free, and protect the modern day warfighter. And as a result, it gives us an edge in battle against countries that have more people than we do, against countries that are bigger than we do, all that kind of stuff, because we've done that. And so in my realm, I've embedded some of that too. And I think all of that realism hidden behind a veil of fantasy makes it believable. So when you suspend disbelief, I can believe that there is a spell system. I can believe in this new pantheon of gods. I can believe that some of this technology happened and the villain just happened to get it. And how are the good guys going to overcome that? I think you see that in a lot of different stories, right? So, I use a variety of ways to ground it in realism, but keep my world building unique. And what I've done is, as I can't write as if I'm a Dungeons and Dragons guy. So I have to change stuff, right? So the characters in my novel there's some that are elves, but I make them my kind of elves. So the Vermilion elves, or the Dale elves, or the Raven elves. They're all different types of elves, but they're not high elves like Tolkien, or they're not. There are no orcs, like you find in Tolkien, or the Uruk-hai in Tolkien, or in D&D. I'm not allowed to use that stuff. So I've created my form of cryptids, my monsters, by going out and really studying other cultures. So you'll see a lot of Asian influence, African influence, Native American influence, Norse influence, and you'll be able to recognize some of these creatures because you might see them and like, oh, that's really familiar to me. Again, talking about world building and making it based on some sort of realism. So instead of me having a skinwalker like the Native Americans did, I have a skin stealer that's more like a doppelganger that can change form and stuff like that. Or, I've got
Mm,
this creature called the antlered man, which is a cursed creature that is hearkened to the master of the hunt, which comes from the North mythos, and stuff like that too. It's not the same, but it's
right,
enough that if you follow it, you're like, oh, I get that. I know what that is,
right.
and so I can identify with it. And that's how I keep it. I keep people embedded in it, and but it's all new. You're not going to find something that you read out of a Dungeons and Dragons book or you read in a Tolkien movie. It's not Middle Earth, it's Warminster. It's not Forgotten Realms, it's Warminster, and it's very specific to that.
And then, if you are able to tell us, what would you say would be the themes that you hope readers take away from the Warminster saga?
Yeah, sure. So I think they'll find some comfortable tropes. You'll find things like struggle, which is part of it. For example, there's unrequited love, there's forbidden love. That's part of this. So there's a little bit of fantasy romance, or what they call today romantasy, that's embedded in that. You'll also find struggles for people that have health problems. The main character is born blind, and he has a magical influence that allows him to see. But that's something. Also, one of the villains is crippled by a curse that was placed upon him by one of his gods, and so
Mm,
he's unhealthy, which creates a situation where he does things that people that are rational might not do, but that he's doing to try to find a way out of his condition, and stuff like that. I also have a main character named Ritter, who I had played as a ranger in Dungeons and Dragons, for a lack of a better term. In my
wow.
novel, he's something called Trollborn, and what a Trollborn is kind of a character of mixed blood, two different races. He's part Raven elf and he's also part human. And so both cultures look down upon him because he's not pure blood. But he's the most noble among the group. And one of the lessons you can take away from that is, even though Ritter ascribes to a higher duty, and is one of these folks that are in this forbidden love triangle kind of thing that's going on, the princess falls in love with him not because he's a pure blood or a noble. She falls in love with him because he is noble in action. And it's the stuff that he does, and it doesn't matter that he's of mixed blood. And so maybe he's like my muggle, to use a Harry Potter term,
Right.
but it shows that people of mixed heritage, you know, you shouldn't look at, the color of the person's skin or or where they grew up and anything. You put all that aside. It's the content of their character, right? As a famous person once said, I think. And so a Ritter embodies that, and I think that that's something that I try to embed into the story, because I think it makes for a really good story. And if I was a young adult reading this, that's a lesson I need to learn. If I'm a new adult, meaning someone that's in their 20s, or an adult that's reading this, is something that I can identify with, and I think that helps pull everybody through as part of it. And so that's some of the themes and some of the lessons and even some of the tropes that I use, as part of this. So if you like big battles and harrowing adventure, you're going to like it, but you're also going to find these little things that also challenge some of our social mores of the day.
Interesting. And how would you say that you balance writing compelling heroes and villains in the story?
Yeah, so the balance comes in this: flaws. And what I mean by
Mm,
that is not everybody is perfect. There isn't someone that's born inherently evil or someone that's born inherently good, right?
mhm.
They earn that. They learn that. That's something that's nurtured into them as part of it. And so for the villain to be bad, you have to show that the villain was once good or made a decision that either one of us would have made. And it just turned out to be the wrong one. And you give them a path to redemption. And like Darth Vader, they can take it, or like some other villains, they might not. And that's what you cheer for as a reader. You make them flawed, and it makes them identifiable as a person, and you want to see how they come back. Like, is this guy going to get a second chance? Is he going to take the chance to step back into the light and move away from the darkness, kind of thing? Same thing with the heroes, right? The heroes can't be perfect. They can't be Superman. You know what I mean? Superman, where there's never any jeopardy for them, where it's like, well, unless there's kryptonite, Superman's going to win, right? It just is what it is. Here, it's like, well, certain characters aren't good at this. So the main character, one of the main characters, Ritter, for example, he's really good with a bow and is mediocre with a sword. So he doesn't like going into hand-to-hand combat because he's not good at it. Or
Right.
Damus, who is this prophet, the one that was born blind, who now has this magical power to see, granted to him by his god. Um, you know, he's out of shape. He's never picked up a weapon in his life, and now he's in these situations where he has to fight sometimes against creatures and skilled people, to save his own life. And it's how he uses his own intelligence, his own
Right.
God-given abilities, to put him over the top. But you show these flaws where he can't ride a horse, right? And so he falls off the horse, and that's the injury he shows to the healer, which is his love interest. And she eventually asks him how he came with these wounds, because she can't figure out how he was injured, and he has to kind of admit that he fell off his horse because he sucks at riding a horse. He's just
Right.
never done it, right? So, like, those little things they humanize people, and I think it makes them much more identifiable. And I think, to the heart of your question, I think that's how people enjoy reading them, because they can see themselves in them and they cheer for them because they aren't Superman. They are not perfect.
And what would you say, in your professional opinion, makes a fantasy world memorable for a reader?
Oh, well, that's an easy one, right? So it's escapism, right? My books are not written to be Shakespeare. I'm not writing a perfect novel, right? I'm writing something to entertain you. And so
Mm,
you pick up a book, I'm not writing it in iambic pentameter. I'm writing it in a way that I want to scare you with the darkness. I
mm,
want to excite you with the action. I want to tease you with the love or the potential of love. I want to upset you when your favorite characters die, but I want you to leave saying, I escaped my realism, my day to day life. I escaped it
right.
for the half an hour or the hour that I read this at night while I was going to bed, or I read it over the weekend, or I listened to the audiobook on my way to work and on my way back to work, and I couldn't wait to get there. It's because this is our escapism, my friend. This is what we do, right? And so, as an author or any form of artist, you're trying to entertain somebody. So I want them to leave
Right.
thinking, "Oh, what I read was really cool. Where's the next? Why don't I have it in my hands yet?" And I think that's what, for me, that's what excites me. I want people to walk away saying, "This story kicked ass," and I love the battle scenes, or I love the romance, or I loved how evil that character was. Or I'll tell you what, the funny thing I get all the time is some of my more popular characters are minor characters. Like the
Mm,
assassin in my book, everybody loves. They're like, "Dude, he's your Boba Fett. Don't kill him." Right? Or, I've got this, for lack of a better term, a hobbit, which is called Huldrafolk in my book. These are these creatures, but instead of being portly, with not wearing boots and lazy and just want to eat all the time like hobbits
mhm,
do, mine are barbarian hobbits that are like on steroids. They paint their faces with
mm.
tattoos, and they fight with that. They ride war dogs and stuff like that. And they're
Okay.
like, they have this barbaric rage to them. And he also drinks a lot, right? So it's like he does sloppy things. He says the wrong things, and at the wrong times, and that kind of stuff is fun. And people thought that he's my like comic relief. And so Blue Connie or and Canis Druwaith or any of these guys, I get more response from them because they like the depth that I've put into the minor characters, and I think that
Mhm.
helps with everything else. It smooths it out and makes it a full bodied novel, where it's just not about the single point of view main character, and you're only seeing through their eyes. It's multi point of view, and you get a chance to know a little bit behind the scenes of all these characters, and then you cheer for some people that may not make it. They might be there just for comic relief or just to help advance the story for just a little bit. But I get more compliments on them than I do on some of the main characters sometimes. That makes it fun.
Do you ever think or feel that when you're writing that you're essentially shining the light towards this particular D&D game, and as a writer you're just penning the light because they're all happening as you mentioned, like if they're multi-point of view, that means it's one thing happening and there's many different ways you can tell it, and the way you're writing it you're deciding how the story gets told, from whose perspective, what point of view, how they're feeling in that situation, and then like the outcome based off of how you determine, like main character gets to get the shine here, or the villain gets to get the shine here.
Yeah, so I think the first part of your question is I'm not the first to do this. There are people that are out there that are commissioned that write stories for Dungeons and Dragons that they've written campaigns and modules about. So like Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman for Dragonlance or Ravenloft, or R.A. Salvatore for the Dritz Duorden, like the Dark Elf trilogy and all the books that he's done there, that all are meant to be stories that are spun out of Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons and Dragons properties. I don't have that license, so I walk a thin line where I'm next to it,
Mm,
adjacent to it, and people understand that, and
right.
they're like, "Cool," because I get it. In the same way that, you know, Terry Brooks writes the Sword of Shannara stuff. It's basically D&D, right?
Hmm.
Except you're in Shannara, right? Well, so for me, I'm not in Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms. I'm in Warminster. So you have to
Right, right.
learn my realm to play that. So that's part one. The other side of it is I think that, those who came before me paved the path, right? And
Mm,
I've deep read multiple times some of the stories so that you can get a sense of how they take it. Whether it's the granddaddy of them all and Tolkien, who didn't have Dungeons and Dragons,
hmm.
but made up his entire. He has a history, has a language. The guy's written, spell systems. He was the first and the greatest, right? All the way down to folks that are contemporaries of mine that'll go out and write their novels that are trying to do the same stuff. And I think as long as we do a good job of following in the footsteps of those masters, that'll continue to sort of shine eyes on what we're doing as authors, and our readership will appreciate it.
What would you say was so far your greatest challenge as a writer, and what have you done to either overcome it, or what are you doing to overcome it if it's ongoing?
Yeah, so the hardest thing for me was understanding how to write dialogue, because in the 20 years prior to that, nothing I wrote was dialogue. It was
Mm,
all, I'm writing, this is going to be on your website, or this is going to be in your book, or this is going to,
hmm.
but it was never conversational. So as part of writing dialogue, there's a couple of things I had to learn early on, which was pacing. You don't want to have instant love. You don't want to you don't want to tell the story all at the same time. You want to show something and not tell somebody about it. As a reader, you want to immerse yourself in a world, to coin the phrase that you used earlier, and you do that by showing. So if I just said that, Nico got up, went to the refrigerator, and got a cup of coffee, or a soda or whatever, um, that's one thing. I told you what you did. But if I said, that as we were on this show, Nico felt parched, and he felt the urge to go, and I described the feeling in your stomach or the feeling in your throat about how parched you were, and you just couldn't wait, for the show to end so you can go get yourself a cup of coffee or a beer. Now all of a sudden I've shown you, and you feel it, and
Mm,
you're immersed in it, and that makes sense. And all of those things I hadn't ever written before, and I had to learn them quickly. And I think it was through those editing processes and having the right development editors and copy editors, the right folks there that helped me understand where I was falling down. Those were the big flaws I had in the beginning, and then I overcame them. I feel really good about the way I write right now. And if I look back at book one, No one else complains about it. It's an Amazon bestseller, man. Like it's done well. I look at it and say that's the worst I'll ever be as an author was my
Right.
book
Isn't that
one, right? And book
crazy? Isn't that
four, I'm good.
crazy?
I feel comfortable. I when I go through the editing process, I got a thick skin now. I'm good, and no one's going to upset me, and I've got it. But it's the lessons I learned in book one, which was still very popular, but ultimately it was through those processes and being open minded and listening to the constructive criticism that made my writing better.
And I was gonna just about to ask you, how do you handle feedback and criticism, whether positive or negative, from
Yeah.
readers, beta readers, and editors?
Well, to be fair, my day job grew such a thick skin for me that someone saying they don't like something doesn't matter to me, right?
Right.
Like you have to, it's like, okay, well, that maybe my book's not for you, but ultimately
Mhm.
I say that in jest in the sense that you could always learn something from someone's criticism. And even if it's outlandish and you don't understand it, find the kernel of wisdom you could take from that. I'll give you one example. I once got a 2-star review. It was my worst review on Amazon ever. And the woman who wrote it gave me 2 stars. And in her comments, she said, I wanted to love this book. I bought it for its cover, but I got 50 pages in, did not finish, 2 stars. And for the first 10 seconds, I was angry. Like,
Mhm.
what? How she only got 50 pages in and blah, blah. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went on. And I said, oh, wait, she liked the cover, right? She bought this for the cover. And when you think back on it, when you walk into a bookstore, what do? You look at the books and you look at the one that has the cover that identifies with you and you pick it up. That's the first thing they see. They haven't read a thing, but they grabbed it because they liked the cover. And then
Right.
what's the first thing you do after that? You turn it over to the back and you read that 250-word blurb about
Mhm.
the book. And then
Right.
if you like that, you'll go in and maybe read the prologue or the first chapter. And if you like
Yeah.
it, then you'll go buy it. So they don't even get to my words until the third thing that they do. And so what I learned was, even though she gave my book a 2 star, the cover sold it. So I used the same cover artist for the next 4 books because she understands what to do, right? And and that kind of stuff has really helped. And it's going to look great in a box set when the last one comes out. And it's won awards for its covers and stuff like. It's really cool stuff. But like for me, like you just have to have a thick skin about it and say, all right, well, they didn't like it. Why didn't they like it? And you don't have to agree with it. You just have
Right.
to understand their position behind it. It's like, oh, that's why. Okay, I got it. There's something. Well, this person didn't like the book because it's a multi-point of view book. All right, well then you're not going to like any of my books because they're all multi. Sci-fi fantasy is festoon with multi-point of view books. It just is what it is. Especially with epic fantasy, it's just so long.
Right.
I'm not writing 35,000 word mystery novels. I'm writing 150,000 word, 500-page epic fantasy novels. You can't look through the same character's eyes the whole time, right? And some
Mhm.
people, especially in contemporary fiction, don't like to do that, and so they might be used to something else. And you take the bitter with the better.
How do you stay in the pocket when you're confronted with that level of pressure? Like, how do you not fold in those kind of moments?
Oh man, so you're going to throw out a football analogy to me, and I'm going to answer it with one. If you feel the pressure in the pocket, you step up into it, right? So you have to, right? You literally step up into that pocket and you buy yourself some extra time to throw downfield, right? Or you
Mm.
tuck it and run. And in this case, feeling the pressure around you. First of all, it's not just pressure from readers and
Mhm.
critics. It's also pressure from my publishers, pressure from the folks in the community that have become my readership, that have said, when's the next one coming out? What do I like? What do I don't like? I can't believe you did this. I can't believe you did that. But what you discover is that they're invested in it. They liked it well enough to read it. I'll see people at conventions. I've got GalaxyCon
Mm.
in Raleigh that starts tomorrow, right? So like, I'll be there 4 days. 65,000 people are going to come by me, and there are
Wow.
going to be people who have spent money to travel there, to buy a ticket, to stand in line, to come and see me, to tell me what they didn't like about it,
That's
right?
crazy.
And you just have to let it roll off, man, and
Right.
just be like, hey, I get it, and it's okay, but you know you listen and you learn from it, right? And if you hear the same thing over and over again, that's a problem, and that's when you realize that you might be the problem. It's not the reader. The
Mm.
reader might not understand, it's disjointed. But to use another sort of football phrase, this is a team sport, right? It's just not me writing it. I've got a publisher that approves it. I've got a final editor that approves it. I've got a development editor that's looking for flaws in the plot lines and the story arcs and the character arcs. I've got a copy line editor that's looking at it for all my grammar, syntax, and spelling. And then it goes out to a bunch of beta readers who tell me what they like before I go to publication and what they don't like, so I can change it before it gets to that step. So by the time it gets to the marketplace, it's gone through a dozen, maybe 15, 16 people. And it's been battle tested and it's ready to roll. And so, it's just not me sitting in a coffee shop, or in my den drinking, a cup of tea and hacking away at my keyboard. It is literally a team sport, my friend.
And how would you say that you walked into having your books have different mediums like games and graphic novels, and how has that changed your uh your storytelling and world building?
Yeah, so a few ways, right? So it came to me through opportunity. When people, I would run into them at conventions, I'd run into them at book
Hmm.
signings. The video game stuff came from me from a fan. The guy owns a video game company, read it and said, "Would you want to see this in a video game one day?" Right? And of course, who wouldn't, right? It's like,
Right.
sure, that sounds great. So we licensed the intellectual property over to them. But as part of the storyboarding process, I learned the difference in the two mediums. So to answer your question very directly, when I'm writing a book, it's very linear. Like I'm the single source. I know how it's going to start and I know how it's going to end. And
Right.
I'm going to push my way through it and you're going to read my story. And there's no, you might say, I wish this character did this, or I wish this character did that. But you and I as gamers know that you have freedom to do that. If
Right.
your avatar in your game, if you're playing a video game, you could be friends with a villain. You don't have to, you can go and try to kill the hero. You can do whatever you want. And so a video game, when I'm storyboarding it, all I really am doing is creating guardrails in which the gamers, the coders are allowing that latitude for their
Hmm.
gameplay because it's a different medium. Same thing with graphic novels. Graphic novels, how do you fit a 150,000 word novel into only 26 pages with 8 cells that you open up and literally you've got two, maybe 8 words in one cell? How do you do that, right? And they do it by, they read the book, they come back, and they're like criminal sketch artists, like police sketch artists. Like they take this character and they make them real,
Right.
and then they create emotion around them by showing you them looking up or looking down, or their eyes are bugged out, or the way that their hands are. It's very illustrative, and you're seeing, instead of me taking 3 pages to explain to you a battle scene, you have to see it right in your face, and you have to feel that as part of the graphic novel. I'm not a graphic novelist, but I'm a
Right.
comic book nerd, right? So I read
Mhm.
this stuff. I've been reading it since I was 5, right? So like, yeah, I love that stuff, and so for me, it's just watching it be adopted into different forms of media is exciting, but I get to learn about them too. And it also allows folks that may not read graphic or may not read traditional novels an opportunity to learn the story by playing the game, or buying the graphic novel because they prefer reading comics than they do reading my longhand. you know is what it comes down to, and that way it gets in touch with more people, and then the story flourishes.
How crazy is it to have fans that love your work so much that they're willing to collaborate with you and bring it to life in other mediums?
I'm telling you, man, it's humbling. It's really humbling. The first time I got any kind of fan art, I didn't know what this, I was flattered. I was like, what? Somebody, it's a true story. In Richmond, Virginia, last year, I was at a GalaxyCon, and this guy came in, and he walked in, and I'm a sports nerd. Sounds to me like you're a sports nerd too. He collects sports cards,
Hmm.
right? And he came up to my
Yeah,
table, and
got
I'm like,
mine
why
right
is this?
over there.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm like, why is this guy bringing me his baseball card collection? It was in a book. It was in all the top loaders and its sleeves,
Hmm.
whatever. He brought it over, and he turned it around to me, and he opened it up. And what he had done is he created his own football card, but it had the faces of his favorite authors, and on the back he left room for me to autograph it. You want to you want to
Yo!
talk about humbling, bro? Like, you're just like,
Wow.
what? Like, I signed books. You want me to sign? You created my own baseball card and then made me sign it. And on the back it
That's
had the list of all my. So
valid.
it's so badass,
One
right?
of
And you're just,
one?
yeah, like the 101, right? And that entire thing was just his favorite authors, and he created them on his own. That's what he does. And
That's
or like I'll get
crazy.
stuff and when I get fan art, I throw it up on the website and I credit people. I throw it out on my social media because these people have read the stuff,
Hmm.
care about it enough that they've taken their own time and resources to draw something or design something on their computer and then come and give it to me. And they're like, is this what Adeline looks like? Is this what Damus looks like? Is this what Ritter looks like? This is what it looks like to me and how important it is to them. And you're just like humbled isn't even the right word for it. It's so hard to describe because there is no other way of saying it. It's just like, and I'll tell you what it does, man. It energizes you. You realize
Hmm.
how important this is to those people, and and it's something that David and I'm not Stephen King. I'm not freaking Brandon Sanderson. I'm like, who am I, right? I'm some CD list guy that you're going to see at a GalaxyCon, and these folks they're invested in it with you, and all of a sudden you're like, holy shit! I got on my website and there's 10 different people that have submitted fan art there that I don't know them. They're out of the blue, out of nowhere, and they've given me this stuff because they're excited about it and they love it. And it's just, man, it is really, it touches you in a way that's it's hard to explain until someone does it to you and you're like, oh, I get it now. Baseball card with my face on it. I'll take it. Where do you need me to sign?
Right. What would you say is the hardest part of having to kill off a fan favorite, if you've ever come across that? What is
I
that?
have.
What
I
is that
have.
kind of emotion? Because as an author, you're very close to these characters on a constant basis, and you have to do it because the story tells it so. And you already know some of these are, you got some fan mail and drawings, and you came to like, I gotta do this. How run us through that?
Yeah, so it's the unfortunate reality of writing a better story, right? Like
Mm,
sometimes it's okay. The dark fantasy stuff is dark for a reason. The good guys don't
right,
always win, right?
right.
And I liken it to the difference between Tolkien, where you have this epic battle and the good guys win, and you're cheering for them and you're happy. You leave the book, when you close that last, the cover of the book, you left happy and it was a great story and the good guys won. But if you ever read Game of Thrones or watched Game of Thrones, it's not always the same way, but it's a better, more realistic story if not all the heroes come back. Some of them come back on their shield and not carrying it, right? And so
Mm,
that's important for that because in this day and age, I think there's an expectation that it's more real than it is, um, just good guys always win. And I think that like you said, it makes for a better story. So, and I have that right now. I mean, my editor and my publisher both said to me, "Are you sure you want to take this angle in the final book of book four?" And or the final book of the book four, the final book in the series. And I'm like, yes, because it makes it a better story. And even though I can see opportunities to resurrect people and bring them back, and it didn't really happen the way you thought it happened, and
right, right.
cliffhanger this and cliffhanger that. In the end, I think that the reality of it, like you said, it just makes it a better story, and people they might be mad, but they'll walk away saying, "Oh, that's really good," and I love that character for it.
And since your books are requiring so much of you, your time, energy, and efforts, how would you say you stay motivated and inspired when you're coming across, your creative writing fatigue or writer's block?
Yeah, for me, it's a couple of ways. One is I'm always out at shows, right? And the energy you get from fans that come up that want to buy your stuff and ask you questions and want to know the behind the scenes things, and that they follow you on social media, they're asking you stuff and direct messages. That kind of stuff energizes you, right? Like that you walk into a GalaxyCon, there's 65,000 people that are come by your table over the course of 4 days, and it's all nerds and everybody just, it's a love fest, right? That kind of stuff is super, super cool and it just energizes you. Same thing with like for me, I don't suffer from writer's block while I'm writing.
Mm.
I'm a planner. So I plan everything and I write the end of my novels, then I go back and write the beginning of my novels, and then I fill in the middle. But I know the direction of the story. And I think that goes back to the function of me being a dungeon master. Like you have to create this thing, you have to be prepared for all this other stuff, and every detail means something. So when I get writer's block, it's pre-writing. It's really what's the best story I can create. And once I got that mapped out in my head, it looks like a, a March Madness block with all these character arcs and story arcs all coming together to the final battle. But once I have that, I'm usually pretty good to sit down and write it. It's never writer's block during. It's always for me pre-game. It's like, well, what's the story going to be? I can't. I don't have the talent that some of those, people that can write by the seat of their pants do, where they can just start sitting down and writing something. For me, if you told me to sit down and write a story tonight, if I didn't know the end, I couldn't write it. I would just sit here like I just not my style. So I get writer's block in the beginning, and once I get past that, and the way I get beyond it is I talk to other creatives. That always breaks up my writer's block. So, and they don't have to be writers. They could be a potter. They could be an artist. They can be a musician. But
Wow.
usually, creative people
Hmm.
will listen to you and they'll offer their advice, even though they might like, I don't know anything about fantasy. Well, that's not what I'm asking you. What I'm asking you is here's a plot arc, help me out. And then they throw two or three things that they like or don't like. And all of a sudden you're like, nah, that stinks. Maybe mine's okay. Or you'll be like, oh, that's a really good idea. Or what if it happened and we took it and twisted it? Like a perfect example of this. So I have a character that appears in my second novel known as the
Hmm.
Ophidian. And the Ophidian came from the dumbest idea I've ever gotten from my wife ever, right? So she wanted a character because she doesn't play Dungeons and Dragons. She wanted something in the books, and her best friend came together, and they're like, "You should put us in the novel together and call us the Gemini twins." And I was like, "What? Like this isn't a superhero? Like, no, that's not what this is, right?" Some I'm literally sitting here like listening to them saying, "No, that's not going to happen." And then I went into the lab, right, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I couldn't get this stupid idea out of my head. And I said, "Wait a minute. What if I take their idea and corrupt it? And now instead of
Mm.
this superhero, Wonder Twin powers activate BS, I've got a character in the novel that is a conjoined twin, and it's an evil
Mm.
conjoined twin where it's a prostitute, and it's called the Ophidian, which is like the twin snakes, where it's like a snake thing, and it has a single body, like two legs and a torso, and then it
Oh.
breaks off at the torso, and it's two living sisters, right? And they're this famous prostitute that is also part of the local mafia, for lack of a better term, part of this organized crime routine. And the bad guy goes to the Ophidian to get information about what's going on the streets. And I was like, this is a great idea. So I took it back to them. And I'm like, guys, I took your idea, I put it in the book. And they're like, oh, the Gemini twins made it. I said, no, I made your characters conjoined evil twins that are a prostitute. And I never lived that one down. Never tell your wife you never tell your wife and her best friend that you made them a prostitute in one of your novels.
No
It
matter
doesn't.
what world, no matter what state, no matter what it is, it
Uh,
could they could have 1,000,001 kills. What did you say?
yeah, all over, man. Yeah, I to this day I haven't lived it down. So but in my head, I took their crazy idea and I made it my own, and I, like I said, I just kind of corrupted it and made it the worst possible outcome for them. But I'm telling you, man, it's a cool ass character and people love it. And it comes back from me taking a really bad superhero suggestion from my wife and her best friend.
And so, just to make sure I didn't skip this point, so you're essentially saying that the way that you avoid writer's block is that you essentially break down the writing portions at the beginning to like you have to write terabytes worth of data and information, and you essentially decide in the first beginning couple of weeks where you're going to allocate every single byte per byte of line of writing, so that way when you do end up starting to write, okay, well, this is what chapter one's gonna look like, this is what chapters two, and then all that is required is to just sit down and get it done, as opposed to trying to freestyle and trying to come up with the story on a whim, so to speak. You like to make sure that you plan it out, so that way all you really have to do is just make the story told when you sit down, versus trying to like, yeah, this would sound good. No, this would sound good. Like that's how
Mhm.
you come up with the story. You break down a huge amount of information, bite size by bite size, and then just get it done.
Yeah. So I plan it in the same way I plan my Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. I think of a
Wow.
villain and I think of a plot. And then I ask the player characters what kind of characters they're going to make, and I fit them into my story so that everybody has a role, and their characters have to do something so that when they all, finish their stuff, and that way you can see it through multi point of view characters, through the
Mm.
eyes of the heroes. But as the dungeon master, I'm playing the villains, right? So they've got to
Right.
be villainous enough to make my characters hate them, enough that they want to go and adventure against them or kill them or whatever they're going to do, as part of this to save the world, right? And so to do that, I have to know where I want them to go. I want to know what the goal is, and the goal is always at the end. And so once I describe what my last chapter is, I then go back and write the first chapter, and then there's no mixed real estate. Like if there's something baked into my novel, it's in there for a reason. It
Hmm.
might look you might not get it on the first pass, but you're like, "Oh, now I see where he's going with that." Now that piece of information that I didn't think was important, I know now it veered me back on the track. I know why it's important now. And it's just like being a DM, it just goes back to what we were talking about an hour ago, right? It's like that's for me, that helps me stay on pace. And so when I said I have writer's block, it's in the beginning. It's coming up with the best possible story. And then once I get it, that's how I write. Ending first, beginning second, everything else in the middle, and that way I don't miss anything.
And because you're involved in so many different aspects of writing and being an author and guesting and stuff like that, and interacting with fans, what would you say is your personal favorite part of this amazing journey you have so far?
So again, I love the entertainment of it, right? So for me, when someone says, I loved your book, or I can't wait for the next book, or whatever it is. It's the satisfaction that someone bought it, read it, and loved it, right? And had a
Mm.
good time with it. And it was their form of escapism. I was able to entertain somebody. Like I can't pick up a guitar and entertain someone on stage. I'm not good looking enough to go and do it on the screen, and my voice isn't good enough to do it on the radio. So there's ways that everybody entertains. What I'm gifted at doing is writing, so I'm pretty good at it, and I think that I tell a pretty good story. And if you listen along when I'm dungeon mastering, or you read along when I'm writing a book, it's going to entertain you, and that's how I entertain people. So to me, the greatest gift that I get back from my readership is that I've entertained them, and they're asking for more. It isn't like, oh, I read that book and I'm not going to get the second one. It's like I read that book, I then binged the second and third one, and when's the fourth one coming out? And that's when you feel that momentum, and you're like, "Yeah, man, I'm on it. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere."
Oh no, that's amazing. And for those that would love to be your fan, that would love to support you, where would you let them know that they can support you, show you love, and essentially start the journey of being your fan?
Yeah, no, it's really easy to find me, jvhilliard.com. That's jvhilliard.com. And if you wanna follow me on any of the socials, you at JV Hilliard Books takes you to my X account, it takes you to my Insta account, takes you to my YouTube and my Discord. Facebook is just JV Hilliard because I had created that way before I was an author, so it's on there. But, and that's the one that's hanging out there, but for the most part, I can be found pretty much ubiquitous. My books, if you're an Amazon reader and you wanna order it, you can download it there. If you'd like listening to audiobooks, it's available there. If you'd like to go into a bookstore, you can buy it at a Barnes& and Noble. Just Google Warminster Saga, Last Keeper, JV Hilliard, you'll find me, and that's where you'll find my work. And I try to answer all of my direct messages, whether they're email or on the site or in my uh, varying accounts, within 24 hours. So don't feel bad. You can reach out to me. I'm an open book. I don't mind answering those kind of questions. I don't shy away from folks that I don't know. Worst case scenario is you're a troll and we eventually end up blocking you anyway. But for the most part, everybody's pretty respectful on socials, and and stuff like that too. So that's where they can find me, and I hope to meet them there.
Perfect. Well, guys, that's a wrap for today's episode of A Gamer's Guide to Productivity. So, once again, a huge thank you to JV Hilliard for sharing this amazing journey with all these amazing insights into his world, how he creates his art. Make sure to check out his Warminster Saga and keep an eye out for his upcoming releases because as you heard him create it, it's going to come out. It's going to come out good and it's going to be enough for you to really enjoy the entertainment value that he is producing. So if you really enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to also show some love to JV as well for showing us exactly how his writing process is. Every action counts in supporting indie podcasts like ours. And for those that really stayed until the end, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Stay productive, stay focused, and let's keep leveling up together.